But have you known people who suffer from severe cognitive disabilities who make substantive contributions to the society?
Yeah, I think that the substantive contribution to society question doesn't exhaust the moral question. And I've also, have you known happy children?
I have.
Right. I mean, and I think, I've known people who aren't as cognitively well developed as others who are quite happy.
Okay, where are we today, sir?
Williams College.
And you are a professor of philosophy.
Yes.
My goodness, that is impressive. And you, sir, what is your name, sir?
Warren Smith.
Warren Smith. And you yourself are your own legend. What is your name, Keith?
Keith McPartland.
Okay, Keith. All right, so today we're going to do a philosophical claim. It is better to suffer injustice than it is to commit it. And that comes from where?
Plato's Gorgias.
Okay. It is better to suffer injustice. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, move.
Just give Keith that mic.
Okay. I'm going to share.
Yeah, we'll share.
Okay, so why do you agree with that?
Well, I think you have to disambiguate the question, where if you think it's is it morally better to suffer injustice than to commit injustice? I think most of us would say, yeah, it's morally better not to do bad things, even if bad things are done to you. I think the question is more interesting if you ask, is it ultimately in your own self-interest to be moral and not to commit injustice, even if, as a result of that, you end up suffering injustice? I think the really radical claim that Socrates wants to argue for is that, no, you're better off by your own lights suffering injustice than you are committing it.
Warren,
I think that's a hard claim.
What do you think of that?
I think I agree, looking at it through the lens of utility, which has more utility, not just ethically. Yeah. I think there is actual utility in your reputation, and the world is going to view you. When you cross that line, right, then that affects your reputation in a deep way. If we think about the people we admire online and things, that we come to admire, it's often they have suffered something, but the moment if they were the ones we wouldn't even care anymore about those people.
Yeah, good. So there's this benefit that at least a reputation for justice gets you. And that's really looked at in Plato's Republic. But there's another question, which is even outside of reputation. So imagine you could commit injustice and nobody would ever catch you. Would you be better off still being just?
I have another claim. I would rather torture someone to death than to be tortured to death. I would rather torture someone to death than to be tortured to death. Move.
That's tough. I don't know. I'm going to go neutral.
Yeah, why are you still thinking?
No, this would be the one I would choose.
Yeah, why would you choose this one?
Because it's such a heavy and a commitment to say something like that.
Yeah.
And I don't know. Honestly, everyone would like to think that they wouldn't. And maybe once the torture started, you would change your mind.
Yeah, no, I was thinking that too.
So I just don't know.
Yeah, so I would totally agree with that. I mean, by disagreeing with the claim, I'm not saying that I would heroically hold up under the choice. I may very well make what I think would be the wrong choice. But I think it would be worse for me to torture somebody than it would be to be tortured. I think that in a situation where I was facing torture, I might very well make the wrong choice.
I have a new claim, and you can throw out claims if you want. I would rather be tortured to death than torture a baby to death.
I would rather be, I think I'm over here. I'm trying to get the claim. So this means take me, not the baby.
Yeah, So that means we value something about a baby's life or what it does to us psychologically more than,
See, I think that's huge, right? Is that there's the obvious sort of consequences of our actions, which I think we're all usually focused on. Like, I want this, how can I go about getting it? But there's this other effect that our actions have, which is constituting us as certain kinds of people.
Yeah. Like
And it
virtue
may-
ethics, like
Yeah. It may very well be that even if you got what you thought you wanted, you'd make yourself into the kind of thing that
Right.
wouldn't even be good for anymore.
Right.
So I think maybe
But not
baby
not
torture
if it
would-
were kind of compelled upon you.
Yeah, that's the question, right? And there's always this thing, I think, in the discussion of ethics, which is what would you do versus what should you do?
Yeah.
And I think, we might think that the answer to the normative question, what should you do, is, I should avoid committing injustice. What would I do? I don't know. I'm like anybody else. I have all sorts of like fears and desires and greeds. And
Why are you on the slightly agree?
For the same reason I was on neutral. It's just, you never know. But no one's gonna go stand over there on this one, It's
yeah, good. So there's this thing too, which is, is it that you only slightly agree with the claim, or is it
trying
that
to-
you're not sure how you would act
trying to-
if you
yeah.
faced it?
I'm trying to acknowledge my own fallibility.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I
Yeah,
get that.
yeah.
That's the thing. I want to say something like, I strongly agree that it would be the worst thing
But
to
it is
do, but
interesting, like,
I'm not
what's the
sure I'm a
difference?
hero.
Like that there is some perceived difference. Like why would I be
Yeah.
there for a grown person? But I think it's just
Yeah.
something evolutionary.
I have a claim. It is worse to torture a baby to death than to torture an old man to death, a very old man to death.
Yeah,
It's worse to torture a baby to death.
I'd agree.
Yeah, maybe I'm an agree. I have to stand on one, so I'll stand on agree. I don't know why. This might just be like a psychological fact of mine.
Because I was thinking that the baby would just be beginning
Right.
its life, and the old man would just be ending its life. His
Yeah.
life, or her life.
So logically,
There's something
yeah.
about that you seem to be taking away a lot from the baby, like the baby's future. Maybe that's something. What about this? It's worse if an 18-year-old dies unexpectedly than if an infant dies unexpectedly.
I would stay here. Strongly agree.
You think it's worse that the 18-year-old is kind of a worse thing?
No, I would strongly disagree.
You would?
Yeah.
That's interesting. Why is that? Why do you think that?
Because I think that by definition, the baby has more life in it if you're just playing the odds. I think in the Talmud, I'm not sure, it's like abortion is, the fetus is somewhere between a skin cell and a life, like a skin and a life. I don't think they use the word cell, but there are just so many ways to look at this. But the more life you have in you, the more longer quality of life should be valued higher.
Yeah, maybe. But now think of the fact that, if it's a really young infant, the young infant doesn't have a self-conception. The young infant doesn't have plans. The young infant hasn't put a lot into the realization of her plans.
But those things will just come in time, right?
Well, they might, but there is this loss, right? That somebody who is literally underway, going somewhere,
I guess
has been cut short.
I guess the
versus
loss
never got started.
Yeah, I mean, maybe the loss is greater for the 18-year-old because they know more people.
That's this question. I don't really know. I mean, I think it's terrible that
I'm thinking of
both
moving
of
to
them
the
die.
disagree.
Yeah. So, okay, it's worse for the 18-year-old. I probably slightly agree that it's worse for the 18-year-old for that.
Warren, you didn't move.
I should probably be slightly agree. I mean, it's more of like just an instinctual. I'll
Make
try
some
this
room
one.
for you on the mat.
All right.
Yeah, there you go.
Because logically, you're right. The baby would have more time. So.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
something.
There's something like balancing out the loss of more years versus the cutting short of actual projects that are already underway. And I think with the old person, you kind of think, well, this person has lived a full life.
Yeah.
They've had a shot.
I have
Right.
one. It is worse for a baby to die than for an adult who suffers from mental retardation to die.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean,
Really? You guys are, I'm really,
yeah, I don't. That's a hard one for me to say. It
Really?
depends on, well, I think mental retardation is just, it's too, vague. a
okay,
term.
people who have,
If you meant somebody in a
IQs
persistent
IQ
vegetative state,
no, someone who has an IQ of, say, 60.
and what's their life like? I mean,
where they're barely capable of sustaining themselves. They don't make any substantive contribution to technology in terms of technologically or social arts
Do they have
or literature.
friends? Do they have like relationships?
I mean, I'm just making this
that are
up on the
important
top
to
of my
them?
head.
Yeah, this is the thing. I mean, I'm neutral because
What about-
I just don't know
okay,
enough about the
what ab-
situation to make any kind of claim. And
What about
I
Peter
do feel like
Singer's? What about Peter Singer's IQ's under 25?
I would say that's equal, so therefore it's not worse or better.
Okay, it is worse for a genius to die than it is for a normal person to die. Move.
worse in what sense?
I'll let
Like-
you define that. I'm thinking socially and societally.
I see
I
what
mean,
you mean.
I might think that.
You're gonna move
I
to
mean,
agree.
you know,
'Cause
there's
it
a lot
could
of
be an evil
geniuses who do a
genius.
lot of crazy shit.
Well, that's
right?
why.
I mean,
That's why I
yeah.
moved to agree from strongly agree.
Yeah. So I mean, if you said something like, "It's worse for society to lose somebody who would have made great contributions."
No,
to
no, but that's true by
society,"
definition.
That seems like, well, I'm not sure. It's worse for society is true by definition. It's worse though. Depends on whether or not you think the moral value of something and the utility are the same
Okay,
thing.
it is worse for society for a genius to die than it is for a person who suffers from mental retardation. Move.
worse for
worse
society.
for
Is this a
society?
genius that is doing
You
good
don't-
stuff?
I'm just going to leave it out there.
All right, then I still don't know.
Really? You're kidding
Yeah.
me?
I think a lot of geniuses do a lot of harm. I mean, and you know, I don't think a lot of mentally retarded people. But again, you know, that term is not liked by a lot of people.
No, that's
people
okay.
with
They
like
can
cognitive
switch
disabilities
to
or
another
something.
channel if they don't like it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Why are you there?
Yeah.
On slightly agree.
Because you framed this one as worse for society. You know what I mean? It's not me equating value of life.
So
I
I'm gonna
just-
I'm gonna be
yeah.
blunt with you too.
Yeah.
I think there's an error in your reasoning.
Okay.
So let me see if I can tease that out, and if I'm wrong, I would be the first one to say so. I would rather have a child who suffers from mental retardation than to have a child who's a genius. Move.
I'd rather have a child than. Wait, you would rather have a child?
I would rather have a child who suffers from mental retardation than I would to have a child who's a genius, classified as a genius.
Okay.
You still thinking?
Yeah. I'm
Okay,
not
well, that
sure.
shows you're consistent. So then, so that tells me that you're consistent in your reasoning.
I think there's a way of going from something like cognitive achievement to moral value that may be too quick, right? And I don't know. I mean, I've known a lot of people who are extraordinarily intelligent and extremely unhappy.
But have you known people who suffer from severe cognitive disabilities who make substantive contributions to the society?
Yeah, I think that the substantive contribution to society question doesn't exhaust the moral question. And I've also, you know, have you known happy children?
I have.
Right. I mean, and I think, you know, I think I've known people who aren't as cognitively well developed as others who are quite happy. And I think that they can have meaningful relationships with people. I think they can love people. I think they can be loved by people. I think that all of that's important, not just what kind of objective impact you have on society.
How about this?
And I think that the idea that the intelligent do more good for society than the non-intelligent. I'm not
Not
sure
the
about that
non-intelligent,
claim.
but those suffering from mental retardation. That's a big difference.
Right. But I think you might think that, you know, there's a lot of people who have done a lot of harm to society who have extremely high IQs.
How
you
about
know?
this claim? People who have a higher IQ, in general, tend to have more moral worth in terms of their potential or actual contribution to society.
I think that that's ambiguous. There's the question of moral worth, and then there's a question of like positive outcomes to society. And I honestly don't have an opinion on that. I
But
mean,
positive-
moral worth, I
yeah.
think I disagree.
Don't positive outcomes to society equate to moral worth? I mean, if someone's
I don't
going
think it
around with an
exhausts
axe,
moral worth.
Huh?
I don't think it exhausts moral worth.
No, it doesn't exhaust it, but if someone is taking away from society, flipping over the trash cans, screaming at
So
people.
let's
for
say
no
you
reason.
have 4 people
Yeah.
of average intelligence and one like super genius
Yeah.
who's involved in actually doing something that's good for society.
Yeah.
And the only way to preserve the life of the genius is by
Oh,
stealing the organs
Gilbert
of
Harmon's
the
example.
less well off. Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, would you do that? It's okay to steal.
Make that into a claim.
It's sometimes acceptable to steal organs from the less cognitively developed to support the more cognitively developed. And let's even throw in not just cognitively developed, but in the process of doing things that'll have positive social impact. I think I would be on that claim.
Okay, well, hold on. I
Yeah.
need one question before we move. Is there transparency throughout the system? Does everybody know that?
Everybody know what?
Like, do they just go into the hospital for a routine checkup and then get their organs harvested? Or are they told, hey, we're going to start harvesting people's organs?
I think it can go either way, but what would be the relevant difference? I mean, I would think
because
that
it compromises trust in institutions.
Okay, good.
Anytime you
Good.
walk
So say you're doing it in secret. If you're worried about institutional trust, say that it would be done in secret.
Oh, then I strongly disagree that
Okay.
that you should not harvest their organs.
Okay. I think I don't think we should have organ harvesting. So I think what that
Are you on
shows.
disagree?
I'd be on strongly.
Okay, we're on. Okay.
So what does that show us, right? Does that show us that there's something involved in moral worth or right to your organs that isn't completely captured by what positive social outcomes you might produce?
Or it shows that if there were a scale or hierarchical prioritization of values, it would be the sovereignty of the individual.
Right, you might think that. And if you do believe that the sovereignty of the individual is a very high value, I think that that's something that's a value whether or not you think that the societal outcomes would be better or worse. And from there, there's a question of if the only thing that you think differentiates somebody with a severe cognitive impairment from somebody without a severe cognitive impairment is the contribution that they'll make to society. We've just shown that contribution to society doesn't exhaust moral worth. So for that reason, I think that just knowing that somebody has a cognitive impairment wouldn't make me think they have less moral worth than somebody who doesn't.
Yeah, because moral worth doesn't equate to social worth.
Right, I think that's right.
Utility is what I would describe
Utility,
it as.
I think that's
Overall
a better word.
utility.
Yeah.
Right.
So
I think there's a couple of
yeah.
claims, right? One, somebody with higher cognitive ability will produce more utility than somebody with lower cognitive ability. Unclear to me that that's true. Secondly, whether or not they would produce more utility, it seems like we think that there's something about moral worth that outruns social utility.
Okay, so then I wonder if the same principle's operative in terms of a negative utilitarianism. Like, does somebody who actively goes out and works to make the society worse, they have less moral worth than someone who's just a lump on a log and sits in their basement and plays video games all day?
Can you repeat that one real quick? I'm sorry.
Yeah, so let's see if I can repeat that. Somebody who actively attempts to destroy the society
Oh, I got you.
and make this whole place a shit show and increase the aggregate suffering in the world, those people have less moral worth than someone who just sits in their basement and plays video games all day.
So if you mean by has less moral worth, they're worse people, I agree.
No.
But
okay, well, what do you mean by less moral worth?
That's what you used it. I want to know what you mean by that.
What I mean by that is that there's a kind of, I don't know, a scale or a kind of light bulb for luminosity in terms of one's moral worth as judged by a suite of factors. How much they contribute to society, do they ameliorate suffering, do they embody the virtues, are they honest, are they decent, are they kind, or do they contribute to the treasury, are they likely to be incarcerated? Oh, did that move you?
No, I just think, I think moral worth is tough, so I'm neutral because I don't understand the question. I mean,
With these series of questions, this is the same thing that keeps running through my mind on each, and I think it goes to like our conversation on God, because if you're talking about utility again, then I could measure that. But I'm going to stay neutral when we talk about morality, because my view of morality doesn't come from, I can't cast that decision through my
So
vision
for you,
of,
it's God.
right. That would be like my belief. You know what I mean? And I'm sure we could challenge that, but like I'm in no place to, and these are interesting questions because of that, but I find myself being like, I can't, and I think you're struggling with that as well for that very reason, because we're not even able to say what is, I guess you could say what is moral and what's not moral, but if you're talking about moral worth.
Yeah, that's the tough part. Moral worth is the one I'm having trouble with. And if there is moral worth, is it sort of intrinsic to a thing as the kind of thing it is, or does it depend on what the thing does? I just don't know. That's a hard question for me.
Okay, well, it would have to have some, maybe I'm going to sound like a Catholic now, I'm not, but it would have to have some component of practical action. But let's do this as a claim. The most important criterion for moral worth is actual contribution to society. The most important criterion for moral worth is actual contribution to society.
Yeah, I think I disagree.
Slightly disagree.
Why do you slightly disagree?
I would say utility to one's family first.
See, I would put that in the milieu, the broad,
Probably.
to others. What if I changed it to others?
But to be of utility to others, you must be the best version of yourself. So you gotta like care for yourself, work out all that.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't know if I think of like the scalability of moral worth
That's where I'm running
in
into.
this kind of
You-
way.
that's where
I'm not
you're-
sure I get it.
Yeah.
I mean,
But haven't we determined that somebody who actively works to push people into the bad life has less moral worth?
no.
We haven't determined
No, that's what I
Oh.
said. I didn't know how to think about moral worth in that case. I think they're a worse person in some way. I think actively pursuing bad things makes you a bad person in a way that maybe ineffectualness doesn't make you a bad person, but I don't know if that increases or diminishes anything like moral worth.
Do you believe in the concept of moral worth? You think that there's a there?
Maybe, yeah. I don't know. I mean, I think it's really tough. I mean, even on utilitarian grounds, if you said something like the pleasure and pain of the person who makes negative contributions counts less than the pleasure or pain of any other person, a utilitarian would say, no, the person is just one person who's a source of pleasure and pain, like everybody else is a source of pleasure and pain. Their moral worth isn't less. You might say their effect on society is more negative. I think that's true.
Okay.
But on like Kantian grounds, I think
Okay, well,
moral worth would be a different kind of thing entirely.
Okay, what about this as a claim? Moral worth is on a spectrum.
Sure. Yeah.
So do you mean something like moral worth is something like worthiness of moral consideration? Is that what you mean? Like to have moral worth is to be something where what happens to you is something that's morally relevant.
No, so if I said I believe very strongly that all people deserve dignity.
Okay.
And so dignity is a property of a person.
Okay. And then do you think that some people have more dignity than others? Or do
No,
you think
but
that
I
you
think
have
some people
dignity
have
by
moral-
being the kind of thing that you are?
Some people have more moral worth than others.
And what do you mean there? Do you mean that some people do a lot of really good stuff and some people don't do a lot of really good stuff? And then do you want to say
Go
that?
ahead, you do want to say?
No, that seems logical too, because I think moral worth exists, but it comes from God. So
Yeah, so I don't
know
believe
you're
in God.
gonna- Right. I know
Yeah,
that's
so-
going to be a disconnect.
Yeah.
So with these questions, I'm framing it that way. Like, yeah, it exists. There's going to be variance in that. I don't know what it is. I can't judge.
Yeah,
what
I
that
was
is.
thinking like it exists on a spectrum. It might be the case that, cats are worthy of a certain amount of moral consideration. But I'm not sure that cats
That's another
are worthy
conversation
of the same
due to
amount of moral
recent
consideration.
events.
Yeah, exactly. The cats merit the same level of moral consideration as
Yeah.
humans. I don't know.
All humans have some moral worth. Move. Oh, but we talked
I
about
agree
more.
with
Are
that.
you satisfied with our?
Well, no, I mean, so one of the things about the spectrum of moral worth is it sounds like here's a kind of thing that I think you might mean. It would be less bad to kill somebody who's actively involved in creating social disutility than it would be to kill somebody who just hangs out in their basement. Is that right? So
Yeah,
does your idea
that's-
of moral worth mean like your life deserves kind of more or less consideration
Yeah, it would
in the
have
scheme
to
of
be.
things?
It would have to be linked to some kind of action.
Yeah, like it's where we have the death penalty.
And if you do something wrong, your moral worth decreases? And if you
Not
do-
wrong. If you do something egregious to violate not the norms, but maybe the rights or the liberties of others, like take someone's life or
Yeah.
rape somebody, or
Then you have
run
less
around
moral worth.
with a hammer and just start smashing people in the back.
Right. So there's two ways that this could go, right? One is that your moral worth has diminished. The other is that certain decisions take into account moral worth, but they also take into account a lot of other things. And sometimes, while not denying that somebody has equal moral worth, I think that because of what they did, treating them in a certain way can be justified. But then there's another claim, which would be by doing certain things, you decrease your moral worth. Which of those would you want to?
I agree. That still fits within my framework.
Yeah,
right.
that
But
the
I
moral
can't
worth
measure
doesn't
I can't
change,
measure
yeah.
your moral. I
Yeah.
can't measure. Well, because Hitler killing Hitler would be good. Certain
Right.
people actions have consequences. We have the death penalty. We kind
Yeah.
of create that framework with laws,
Right.
attempting to do this, but we only enforce those. Human beings only step into that realm when there's necessity out of enforcing laws.
Yeah, okay, but
Yeah,
I mean, one way that
that's
you
how
could
I
do
see it.
that is you could think, it's not that I think that Hitler suddenly had less moral worth. It's that I think there were lots of considerations other than the moral worth of Hitler that meant killing Hitler would be, in all things considered, a good thing to do.
Strategic.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, I mean, but what I want to know is whether or not you think that, one, is moral worth something that's sort of intrinsic to the being as the kind of being it is? And two,
Yeah,
do you
so
think that changes?
If you kind of existed subspecies aeternitatis, and you existed outside of if you were like a god, and everybody had a number on their head from -10 to 10 that showed their moral worth,
Okay.
do you accept that as a thought experiment?
I mean, I guess I think like brute differences in moral worth probably don't make a lot of sense to me.
Like
So I would need to know, like,
minus
what
10
does
would
that
be
mean?
Hitler. Minus
Okay.
10 would be Hitler.
Okay.
Like
try it.
5 would be somebody who
And
works in the...
why is Hitler at a -10?
Okay, well, I just
No.
try to find some consensus.
No, it's fine. But what I'm asking you is, what are the features
We always have to go to Hitler.
in virtue of it? Right, it's the argument from Hitler.
Yeah.
But what are the? I mean,
Well, mass murder.
what are the features in
Yeah.
virtue of which a thing has greater or lesser moral worth?
Well, their actions in the world.
So what you're saying is something, again, like moral worth is really just a proxy for how bad are the consequences that you've caused for others. Or maybe
I think it's a necessary
yeah.
but not sufficient condition, yeah. I think then if you agree with that, then the conversation would have to revolve around what would be the sufficient conditions, what would be the extras beside how you made an impact on the world, how you affected the world. But
So here's the thing,
Yeah.
how you actually affect the world
yeah,
is going to depend on all sorts of things that are outside your control. So I can do something, and if I do it in a certain context, it might have a huge amount of benefit. If I do it in another context, it might, not amount to much.
Yeah. It's a good example.
Does my moral worth depend on how it actually goes?
yeah. So that goes back, does the line of literature on moral luck.
Yeah, it is a kind of question of moral luck and whether or not.
That's why I think it comes from God, right?
What?
That's
That
why
would
I
be.
think it's
That would
God.
be. I mean, there are all
It's
these
an
kind of
argument for
questions.
it,
How
I
does
think.
that work? But
It's 'cause
I mean, there is a thing where the problem with what if you just care about what the actual consequences are, that seems like things totally outside your control impact your moral worth, which I think probably whatever concept of moral worth we have, we probably don't think that it varies because of luck.
So let me ask a question, and you can, of course, refuse to answer this question if you don't want to. So let's just go with my -10 to 10.
Mm-hmm.
And you're 0, you just sit in your basement all day. What, and I realize, absent the God thing, and again, you don't have to answer this question if you want to, What would your number be?
I don't know.
Well, we don't have that much detail for the scale. So wait a minute. 0 is sitting in your basement.
Yeah, 10,
What's
10
10?
is your like, you
Who's
live
10?
your whole life in service to others. You try to help the community. You're decent, honest. Honesty presupposes the justice of the system from the Republic. 10 is you're just a pathological mass murdering maniac.
Okay. So I'm not a pathological mass murder, but now what if like a pathological mass murdering maniac manages to kill Hitler? Right at the moment that Hitler is about to come to power. I mean, again,
so there is a
these are-
utility. There is a utility aspect. But actually, where I was going to go with that was I was going to say, if you could increase your moral worth at the expense of the life of someone else, but then forget that you did that, like you could kill a random person and increase your moral worth, and then forget the fact that you ever did. It would be extirpated from your memory.
It wouldn't work.
Yeah, I think
Well, no,
that-
because then
I
you'd
think
be a
that
good
it's
person.
counter possible.
Right.
Then you'd be a good person. Why?
Because it's an act of evil. And that, like, goes to the idea of good and evil, though, and that's where morality is coming from. Like, your moral worth is going to be deemed to punish. So by definition, by killing that person, you're going to be lessening your moral worth in the eyes of God or whatnot.
But once you do that, you futz with the laws of the universe and then become a good person because you have no memory that you ever did. Like, in other words,
How would we do that? Are we
Well,
God in this thought experiment?
no, but that's a good one. I want to ask that question. Moral worth can only come from God. Move.
Yep. That's what I've been. I'm gonna stick with that one then.
Yeah, I don't know.
It can only be judged by God. Your actions are going to affect it, and we can better our moral worth, but it's not for me to assign someone's or be able to judge it.
If there were no that, okay, so if
Is this like if there was no God, all would be permissible? Is this like a kind of
well, that's what I was.
Dostoevskian
That's,
thing?
that's what I
Okay.
was going to ask.
Yeah.
If there were no God, would people still have moral worth?
There's no way to
know.
answer that.
Original question was, it is better to suffer injustice than it is to commit it.
Right.
If there were no God, where would you be?
Yeah, so again, and this is I think like a really interesting thing about Plato's Gorgias, right? Because there's a whole section of the dialogue later on where a lot of this stuff has to do with like the posthumous like effects on you. Like after you die, you'll be punished in a certain way. And that seems to be like, it's actually in your prudential best interest to be virtuous, because otherwise you'll be punished in hell. Now, if you didn't think there was a hell, that argument wouldn't work. So I think actually the more interesting argument is, does being an unjust person make you the kind of thing that cannot have a good life?
Well, Aristotle would say, yeah, because you can't have virtue friendships.
I think that's and that's something where I think I kind of agree with that take. But then that creates a very strange thing, right? Because you have to deny that people have authority with respect to whether or not their life is going well. Because I think there's plenty of people who you said, is your life going well? They'd say yes, but they're the kinds of people that can't really have loving relationships, that can't have virtue friendships, there's a certain number of things that they can't have. So the idea might be that there's like a serious opportunity cost that you face if you live unjustly. And that's constituting yourself as the kind of thing that can't be genuinely happy. And I think I think maybe there's something to that.
Yeah. In fact, I'm positive there's something to that.
Yeah. It's again like the more we got really into some weird territory with
The torture
cognitive
stuff.
impairment, torture of babies, all of that stuff. And this notion of moral worth, which I've got to say, at the end of the day, I can see that a theistic view gives you a kind of answer to that. You're imago Dei, you're in the image of God. That's why you have moral worth.
Well, I would say because I can't know. There might not be God, right? So when I do that thought experiment, it doesn't change anything, because I still, at the end of that thought experiment, I still can't judge that person's moral worth or what moral worth is, regardless of whether, like, he might not be, like, God might not exist.
So if you thought that moral worth came from being in the image of God, and you thought nothing could be in the image of God if there wasn't a God,
I don't
then
think
you
it's
would have to
being in
say
the image
nothing
of God. I think
had-
it's living in a way that is towards what we know as good.
Okay.
It's the best word we
Right.
have, or
okay, so
morally.
then what you'd say there is
Living
you'd say,
as though
look,
God exists. That kind of,
even like, so for theists who say that a certain kind of person is in the image of God, you might say, well, there are some features that certain kinds of things have such that they count as having moral worth by having those features, whether or not there is a God. Is that the idea?
sort of, yeah. But
Okay.
striving to be good, you're
Yeah.
more likely to do good.
Right.
All right.
so. Yeah,
we
this is
good?
great.
And we wrap it
Thanks.
Sure.
Yeah.
up? Any final comments,
No.
final thoughts?
No, I mean,
So what we're trying to do is we're trying to get people to use this in the classrooms.
yeah, it's very interesting.
And I don't know why people don't do it. It's free. Anybody can do it. Why do you?
I think I do things like this. I mean, sort
but
of like
specifically,
Socratic
like-
questioning, but it's not with,
Teach people
it's,
how
you know,
to speak across a
dialectical
divide.
investigation of
Yeah,
people
that's
like
exactly
thinking.
what it is.
I do believe in that very strongly. I mean, I think that's essential to an education. It's
Well, yeah,
like
and, unless you're in a madrasa.
questioning your own presuppositions and trying to figure out, you know, I have this little thing where I think there's lots of things that you learn that make you better at getting what you want. I mean, one of the purposes of a liberal arts education is to try to think about the value of what you want. And I think that, you know, you're very lucky to be able to spend a certain amount of time in your life trying to think through those questions. And I think that's like, if there is an advantage of a humanistic education, it's that. It's not that it, you know, makes you better at creating documents for people. It's that it gives
leads
you
you toward a good
chance-
life.
It gives you a chance to try to figure out what a good life is. And then hopefully it gives you some of the tools that you need in order to live a life like that. But I think a lot of that can't just be imposed on you from without. It has to be through a process of examination.
Cool. Thank you.
Hey, thanks, man.